To the program, we're discussing ISIL and efforts by governments around the world to combat the group. Joining us again is Daniel Cohen from Tel Aviv. He specializes in cyber warfare at the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel. From New Jersey, we have Hamid Abdel-Jabbar. He's a professor of Middle East Studies at Rutgers University. Joining us on the set is retired U.S. Colonel and intelligence and security expert Cedric Layton, and Tawfiq Hamid, a one-time Islamic extremist and now an Islamic reformer. Thanks again to all of you for being with us. Daniel, let me start with you in Tel Aviv. You know, we heard in our report earlier on there that Twitter has closed down thousands of accounts belonging to people who are running this propaganda program for ISIL. I mean, how much of a setback is that to ISIL's strategy, to their recruitment campaign? Because, you know, shutting down a Twitter account is a bit like playing that game of whack-a-mole. You know, you knock something on the head and it pops up in another place.
Exactly, more than that. We're following some of the Twitter accounts, and I can tell you that I saw one man was blocked, and then he opened 78 new accounts. So that really is like, this is not the solution for that. They have like 500 heavy users, that every one of them has like 1,000 followers, that they are retweeting between them. The other side, the ISIL side, now understood that Twitter is like blocking their accounts, so they gave like a manual of how to defend our Twitter accounts, how to open new ones, like instructions to each one of them, what to say also. Even only, you talked about before, on intelligence on the ground, only to show the success in battles, don't talk about battles before they finish. So a lot of like a manual of instructions how to fight on Twitter.
Isn't that an irony, Tawfiq, that ISIL here is using modern technology, a technology developed in the West, to counter the West?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the real threat to our civilizations, that you have mindset that's ready to destroy you and me and all the world. And at the same time, this mindset is not weak. They can use our technology against us. And that is the real threat for our civilization.
I mean, what is ISIL's goal here? You know, we just heard Tawfiq here tell us that it wants to destroy, you know, Western civilization. Is that ISIL's goal?
I don't think they were, in fact, they came together to destroy the Western civilization. In fact, in their views, they want to create what they call a pure Islamic State, the way they understood Islam, the way they were preached about some of the Islamic scholars throughout history, like Ibn Taymiyyah and others, where they have a pure kind of Islam where they can impose the Sharia laws the way they understood it. And they, in fact, they hurt Muslims and Arabs more than any other groups, in fact, and they're destroying all these layers of civilization. And as you can see, they are active in many Arab countries like Syria, Iraq, Libya, and part of Nigeria. They might spread out in Egypt and in Yemen. So in fact, that's their goal, in fact, to destroy anything who stands before their goal. Their goal is an Islamic, the way they under an Islamic caliphate. And if they see Arab or Muslim standing against them, they will destroy them. And if they see any other Western powers in front of them, they fight them and they try to destroy them. As you can see, they're taking their battles from one Arab area to another Arab area, as they just recently had some followers in Libya. And Boko Haram just recently, 2 days ago, they announced their affiliation and their loyalty to the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria.
Cedric, if we look at what is being done in countries like the United Kingdom, like the United States, I mean, there's a very controversial strategy which is being used right now, which is where people's communications are being monitored by governments. And of course, this has led to all kinds of accusations that governments are becoming big brother, etc. But if we look at the case of this very high-profile ISIL member from the United Kingdom, Mohammed Mwazi, and he's been accused of actually carrying out these executions. That's the guy we saw with the black mask, known as Jihadi John. That's the name they've given him. He was being monitored by British security. Did he slip through the net?
In essence, yes. I mean, once you let somebody like Jihadi John or Mohammed Mwazi go ahead and actually become operationalized like he did and carry out missions on behalf of ISIL, then you've lost. You've lost your opportunity to either prevent somebody from going and joining ISIL, and you've certainly lost the opportunity to go in and prevent them from exercising some kind of physical force against, in this case, against hostages. So in his particular situation, I would say, yes, the British intelligence services and the law enforcement forces in Great Britain actually lost their chance to get him. They were monitoring him. They had questioned him. MI5, the British Domestic Intelligence Agency, had spent some time actually interviewing him. There's tape of him referring to that interview and actually speaking about the kinds of questions that...
And there was an attempt to recruit him at one point, wasn't
there was. Actually, there was an attempt to recruit him, and that attempt failed, and in fact may have caused, in his mind, a greater degree of resentment against Great Britain and what it represents, and against the forces of the elements of the British state. So he became perhaps even more radicalized as a result of these efforts, not only to monitor him, but also to recruit him. And it may be that the efforts actually had the opposite intention of, the opposite of, occurrence of what they were intended to do. And that is a significant thing where we need to calibrate all of our efforts, be they law enforcement efforts, be they social media efforts, or be they intelligence efforts, to actually figure out what the reaction of people is going to be to these things. And it's very hard to do. You know, the lab experiment is actually not just a lab experiment, it's actual operations. And that becomes a significant issue when you're trying to deal with people, and you have to learn, in essence, by doing, and you are going to make mistakes. And unfortunately, Jihadi John is a mistake.
Right. Daniel, when we look at these online strategies that are being used by ISIL, things like using Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, in essence, these are not really sophisticated strategies, aren't they? I mean, a middle school kid can put these things together. So are we, in a sense, giving them more credit than they deserve?
They're using maybe simple technologies that every youth of today from Generation Z could use, but they're doing it in a more sophisticated way with a sleek campaign. When you add all of the videos that are high quality, it's not something that someone from the street can do easily, but when you take the videos, the social media campaigns, gaming communities that also they are affected over there, publications like the big, when you take it all together, it's a full campaign, it's a new media campaign that is very sophisticated in its message and how they transfer it to the recruitment or supporters that they wanna like say the message, or even when they want to use it to influence the citizens of the West and the decision maker in the West. So it's not the technology that is sophisticated, but the message and the idea that is behind it.
Hamid, is the international community doing enough here to counter ISIL? I mean, let's take the United Nations, for instance. What is the United Nations doing right now? And should countries like the United States perhaps have a bit more of an honest discussion with people in countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where we know that they are sponsors of these militant groups?
Yeah, I think the international community came very late, too little, too late. In fact, they start addressing the issue in 2014 by adopting Resolution 2174 and subsequent resolutions. But in fact, to operationalize these resolutions, it's very hard and it's complex also. So, I mean, the international community should have came together long before that. And they are, in fact, they are disunited when it comes to address issues like Syria, the Syrian war, which created, in fact, it was the right environment to create ISIS. The disparity and the division within the Security Council and using 4 times the veto power, it allowed all these recruits to come and to thrive. And again, also, they've been silent about those countries who support them. And they created this ideology of extremism for a long time. In fact, they coached them and they spoiled these countries. You know that everyone knows that this idea of extremism and the ideology that is sprouted and came from a country like Saudi Arabia and spread it out. They were good jihadis when they were fighting the Soviets. When the fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan ended, everybody disowned them. But however, the ideology they created continued to spread out throughout many countries. So I think the United States should be bold and should be address those issues and should talk to their whom they call their allies in the Middle East, like countries like Saudi Arabia and many other Gulf states, and including some North African and some monarchies also, to come together and address this issue from the root causes and from the very beginning.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear